Hello and welcome back to History 475. I'm Dr. Ron Traylor. Now, video two, stopped prematurely. And let me explain what happened. My computer memory storage capacity uh, was full and it couldn't take anymore. So it had to stop. Well, I have fixed that. I emptied some of my memory down. And so we're going to start up again, and we're going to start where we left off. We were in video number two. To keep things simple, though, I'm going to call this one video three, but it's going to be much shorter. It's only because remember I said that I'm trying to keep these video lectures to about an hour in length. And when we stopped number two, we had done about 50 minutes or so. So I'm going to do about 10 minutes, then I'm going to stop it and we'll start with the next video, which will be number four. This is number three. It is really a completion of number two. Now that I have you thoroughly confused, let's go ahead and begin. Now, what we said was that President Washington had sent John Jay as a special diplomat to England to try to solve some of the problems that we were having with the British. Without explaining it, because I explained it in video two, let me just list the things that Washington wanted Jay to accomplish. He wanted to get the British out of those forts that were still on American soil uh, 10 years after the end of the American Revolution. He wanted for the British to compensate American ship owners and American merchants for the value of the cargoes and the ships that had been confiscated by the British as a result of the Neutrality Act. Um, he wanted to get compensation for the value of the slaves that had been carried away by the British at the end of the American Revolution. And he wanted a commercial treaty that would legalize U.S. trade with the British West Indies. Now, I think that's where we stopped. So let me, at the risk of uh, repeating myself, let me repeat myself on that last point, and let's make believe that I've not talked about it at all. To get a commercial treaty that would legalize U.S. trade with the British West Indies. Now, remember that before the American Revolution, the Americans were British subjects, right? They might have been in North America, but they were British subjects. And because they were British subjects, the American businessmen, American shippers, American farmers, they were permitted to trade with any country that the island of Britain traded because it was to England's advantage to do that. Because every time that we sold something, including to the British West Indies, which I said included but was not limited to places like Barbados and Jamaica, every time we sold something to them, tax was collected, and that helped the British, right? However, as soon as America wins the American Revolution and becomes independent, we are no longer a part of the British Empire. We are an independent, sovereign, self sufficient nation. And at that point, there is no advantage to the British permitting us to continue to trade with places like the British West Indies. Now, the British West Indies were really nice for us to trade with because they were close. The only, there were very few places that were owned by the British that were actually closer than the British West Indies. Canada was one of the places. Florida was one of the places. But except for those two, the British West Indies were the closest places. And before the American Revolution, the British West Indies had bought a bunch of American stuff, most especially food. Because I think I mentioned in the second video that that those islands, the British West Indies, were the so-called sugar islands. Sugar was grown there. They used every square inch of land to grow sugar. And as a result, they didn't grow their own food. They bought it from somewhere else. They could literally um, buy their food from somewhere else and still make more money by growing cane. And the British West Indies had bought a lot of American agricultural goods, especially food stuff like corn, corn and fish. And so corn from the South and fish from New England, it helped both of those sections economically, didn't it? And then boom, the American Revolution ends, and the British say, forget ever trading with the British West Indies again, Charlie. We are going to make that money ourselves. We're not going to let you make that money. And so, ever since 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed that ended the American Revolution, the United States had not been permitted to trade with the British West Indies. That is why Washington asked Jay uh, to negotiate a commercial treaty with the British that would legalize United States trade with the British West Indies. Now, there's a built in problem here with Jay. The United States was not a powerful nation. Uh, there are some historians who say that the United States and France together still couldn't have defeated the British in the American Revolution if the British had wanted to throw the full weight of their military and their navy against us. Some of those same historians say that the British just got tired of fighting. I mean, it was like fighting cousins, right? I mean, we were fighting brothers. The British just got tired of killing us and having us kill them. Now, you can argue that theory, but the point is that England never did bring all of its power against the coalition of the United States and France. And now France is out of the picture. We still have this treaty with France, but we're doing our best to avoid its terms because the French Revolution has gone bad, and we don't want to be an ally of a country that is invading its neighbors. So it's just us and us by ourselves. There's no way we can defeat the British if we were to go to war with the British. And as a result, Jay was negotiating with the British from a position not of strength, but of weakness. He couldn't make the British do anything that the British didn't want to do. And he knew it, and the British knew it. Um, so finally, the British did give a little bit. For example, they promised to evacuate those forts on the northern frontier by 1796. Still a couple of years in the future, right? They were not going to. Basically, they were telling Jay, "Sorry, we're not going to get out immediately. We will get out, but it'll be on our timeline and under our terms." And the British promised to pay damages to the American shippers for the cost of the lost ships and the lost cargoes. Now, what happened in the long term here? Yes, the British did, in fact, get out of those forts up on American soil up near the Canadian border. They did keep that promise, but they never paid us to compensate us for the value of the lost ships and the lost cargo. And um, there was there was very little, if anything, that Jay could do about it except sort of grin and bear it. Now, when word was received of the terms of this treaty, which we still refer to as Jay's Treaty, the American public was outraged that we had not received much that we had demanded. The Federalists, um, both parties, actually, the Federalists and the Republicans, but especially the Republicans, uh, were, some of them at least, were suggesting that we needed to go to war with the British over this once again. Now, for those of you who've had my Constitution course, you know that the Constitution talks about the approval of treaties. It's the job of the U.S. Senate, not the entire Congress, but the Senate only, to approve or disapprove treaties that are negotiated by diplomats. And so, Jay's treaty was sent to the U.S. Senate, uh, and the Senate understood that this was a very unpopular treaty in the United States. And so, rather than debating the treaty in the open, in public, they debated it in secret. They literally shut the doors and debated the treaty in secret. And it passed, but it only passed by one vote in the Senate. Washington signed it. Washington understood that it was probably the best, even though the treaty, as far as the United States is concerned, the treaty was a bad treaty. It didn't give us much of what we'd asked for. We probably got more than we should have received, honestly. So Washington sort of holds his nose and signs the treaty, since it was probably the best that he could get. Plus, Washington feared that because of the close relationship that had previously existed between the United States and France prior to the French Revolution, and because the Treaty of Alliance, even though we didn't like the Treaty of Alliance and its open-ended terms, even though we didn't like that, the reality was that Washington was afraid that if we didn't approve Jay's treaty, that France, which was also more powerful than the United States at this time, very well might step in and try to conquer the United States itself, make the United States a satellite, if you will, of France. All right. Now, this is lecture 3. I'm going to stop it right now. This should be the end of number 2, but it's not. It's the end of number 3. We're going to stop, and when we pick back up in the next lecture, that will be number 4. All right. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.